what I want to finish up, because of Fred's introduction, was that the tool that was used to investigate and prosecute both the Republican Assembly leadership and the Democratic Senate leadership in 2002 during the caucus scandal was something called the John Doe Law, which is fairly unique here in Wisconsin. It was set up actually prior to when we became a state in the territorial legislature. And what it does is, rather than establishes a grand jury to be assembled to go then and investigate crimes around the state, including political corruption, instead what it is it's a judge and a prosecutor who are able to come together and call witnesses before the judge and get sworn testimony, grant immunity. It's a much more efficient and a much less expensive process than the grand jury process, and it is used for virtually all prosecutions of criminal activity in Wisconsin, and has been used that way for years. In fact, Mike McCann, I was talking to him the other day, and he said, you know, he doesn't even remember the last time a grand jury was convened. Because the problem with grand jury is that it's pretty unwieldy. You have to call lots of people before the grand jury. It takes much longer periods of time. There's the expenses that you have to pay to grand jury people. It's not as efficient, and it's far more costly than the John Doe process. And what McCann has said, which should really, really disturb you, and it certainly disturbs me, is that if the John Doe process were not in place in 2002, he never would have been able to prosecute Senate Majority Leader Chuck Qualla, who, by the way, was charged with 20 felony counts, including extortion. It never would have been possible under the grand jury process. The same with Scott Jensen, 4 felony counts. Or Mickey Foti, Oconomowoc own, 1 felony count. Bonnie Ladwick, who, by the way, in 2002, do you know who her legislative assistant was? Robin Voss. So he knew what was going on, and she was charged with a misdemeanor and didn't run for office. He took her place. Robin Voss took her place. So part of this is revenge. Part of this is going after the folks that went after their heroes back in 2002. But the John Doe process, and what's particularly horrible about this legislation that's going to be in the October floor session, is that it keeps the John Doe process for, you know, kids who are arrested for dealing marijuana, or, you know, any normal person who's involved in any kind of crime. It carves out an exception for political corruption. The John Doe process will not be utilized if it's a political crime. What they've written the law to say is that if it falls under Chapter 11 or Chapter 12, the campaign finance or the ethics chapters of the Wisconsin statutes, then that is not the vehicle. The John Doe vehicle won't be used. So what that means is that if there is political corruption occurring in Madison, there may be. We won't know, though, because the John Doe law will be changed to exempt. It's a carve-out for politicians only. In fact, I was very impressed by the fact that the Democrats in the committee had said, okay, if you want to change the John Doe law, change it for everybody, so that everybody in the state is affected equally. And the Republican response to that was, well, no, because there are a lot of serious crimes that call for utilizing the John Doe. But you know, a lot of the political quote-unquote corruption is just free speech. So that's the response, and that will be the defense that they will be using on the floor of the Assembly in the Senate in this month. And you ought to be very wary about it. And I think it's a powerful thing to fight back against, because when you have a carve-out only for politicians, then that is something that I don't think very many people like. They're supposed to be serving you as public servants, not operating under a separate set of laws. It's like the open meetings law. You know, we have an open meetings law for all entities of local units of government around the state, except there's one entity that's exempted from the open meetings law. That's, of course, the Wisconsin legislature. So it's one of those do as I say, not as I do types of things. So the destruction of the Government Accountability Board. By the way, they wanted to replace that with partisans. Representative Sanfilippo of West Allis, or I guess he's New Berlin, has said that he wants to model it after the Federal Elections Commission, which is 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. Well, yes, he does. Do you know why? Because that is the most dysfunctional federal agency in the United States today. They don't do anything because every vote is a 3-3 tie, and on a 3-3 tie, no action is ever taken to enforce the campaign finance laws at the federal level. That's what they want to do on the state level. They try to make it sound very fair and attractive. Oh, there'll be 3 Republicans, there'll be 3 Democrats, it'll be very fair. But on a 3-3 tie, no action's taken. So that's exactly what they're trying to do, and that's the problem. So those are the issues with regard to the GAB. Those are the issues with regard to the John Doe Law. As Representative Kessler will be able to tell you too, there's far more that they have in mind. They're right now rewriting the campaign finance laws. That's called Chapter 11. We're involved in trying to help create an alternative to that. But basically what they want to do is say that there should really be no laws that would prohibit coordination between outside groups like Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and candidates. And the reason they'd like that to happen is that way campaigns of candidates can work with outside groups and basically destroy contribution limits. Because think about it, under current law, you can give a $10,000 contribution to a candidate for governor, Scott Walker or Mary Burke. If you destroy the coordination law, then you could give $10,000 to Scott Walker, but then you could also coordinate with his campaign and say, okay, I'll spend $1 million in outside money. You just tell us where the best place to utilize that money. You know, what geographical areas should we run nasty ads against Mary Burke? You tell us where we should do it. It makes campaign contributions an afterthought. It makes them meaningless, because if you can spend as much unlimited money as you want attacking somebody through an outside group, then the campaign contribution itself to the candidate means nothing. That's something that they want to put into Wisconsin law, unless the communication says vote for or vote against. If it says Fred Kessler is a liberal, Fred Kessler wants to raise your taxes, call Fred Kessler and tell him you don't want that, that's not considered a campaign ad, because it doesn't say vote for or vote against. It's what we call the phony issue ad loophole. And the Republicans want to put that into law, that unless you use the vote for or defeat, you can say anything else you want. It can have the same effect as a vote for type of communication, but it wouldn't be subject to limits, it wouldn't be subject to disclosure. And we would have nothing but secret money inundating Wisconsin, and elections would be totally under the radar screen. So that's part of the campaign finance law that they want to do. They want to do a lot more. We want to do something very different and propose an alternative to what they're going to do, and that'll be rolled out fairly shortly. This is a very busy month coming up, October. So keep an eye out for those. And I guess maybe in the second section, I'll go back to talk about redistricting reform and where that stuff is. And then Fred, I'm sure, is going to talk about a lawsuit, which I think has a great deal of promise that could bring us the kind of reform with regard to redistricting that we need in this state. Really quicker than I think the Republicans are going to allow even a public hearing on the very good legislation. Right?
All right. Thank you, Jay. I truly appreciate that, and I appreciate the discussion you had on the John Doe and on the GAB. There's so much more that they've offered that you have to understand. Some of the laws that